It's time once again for another edition of Talk to Me. And now, here's Emmy himself, 8-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, Maynard Eaton.
Hello again, and welcome to a new edition of Talk to Me. I'm your host, Maynard Eaton, and joining us is Dr. Phyllis Dawkins and Dr. Johnny Parham, both instrumental in a new program called the HBCU Executive Leadership Institute. Dr. Parham, HBCUs, you've been involved with, have been popular of late. We've heard a lot about them. You're a former Morehouse man. I went to Hampton. Why now? Why suddenly have HBCUs become in the news, you think?
Interestingly enough, I guess it kind of took the murder of George Floyd to create some kind of broader awareness of just how important institutions are that serve African Americans. And so you've seen some kind of gravitating to supporting not only historically Black colleges, but also many of the community-based organizations that serve our community. So basically, that's the environment in which we're living. But let's bear in mind now that this is not the first time that we've gone through this cycle. Let's remember that following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, there was, again, a kind of gravitating to African-American institutions. That's when actually many municipal governments began to establish affirmative action programs. Yes. Many of the traditionally white institutions began to establish really aggressive programs to recruit African-American faculty and staff, as well as students. But then we go through these cycles in this country, as you are very much aware. And that's where we are today. We're in the midst of a very important cycle. Now, the question is, how long
will that last?
Will it last?
Dr. Dawkins, you're a former president of Bennett College, as I understand it. What's your sense of where we are now, where we've been and where we are now, if you think with regard to HBCUs?
Oh,
and we're all so proud of.
Yeah. I just recently rotated off serving on the president's board of advisors for historically Black colleges. And during this pandemic, the historically Black colleges have received a lot of resources. And most recently, when I was at Bennett College, we started the deferment process for the HBCU Capital Loan Program. And during that period, working with UNCF and Michael Lomas, Rodriguez Murray, we were able to get 13 institutions to receive deferments on their loan payments. Then in December, the government forgave all the loans to the tune of $1 billion.
Well, that was a breath of fresh air, I'm sure.
Yes, and that goes along with what Dr. Parham just said, that because of all that attention that was given to the George Floyd and other racial and equity initiatives, HBCUs have benefited from this time. And so, yes, we are beginning to see a lot of resources poured into our institutions, but we still need more.
What's the state, would each of you say, of the HBCUs today? I mean, there's some who are still struggling, Morris Brown being one of them. And I'm told, Dr. Dawkins, you help keep Bennett College alive with your fundraising efforts.
Yes. The small private institutions, whether it's Bennett College, Morris Brown College, or any of the small private UNCF institutions, many of us struggle. And we struggle because we didn't start with a sound financial base. Right after slavery, we never received reparation funds. So all of us were found in the basements of churches and homes without adequate funding. And so we have survived. We have survived over 100 years, almost 200 years, okay, since the first institution in 1938 with Cheyney University. Yeah. So many of us are still alive. I think at one time we had 140, we're down to 101 accredited institutions, and 105 still exists. Morris Brown is just recently receiving attention from TRATS. Bennett College has submitted an application to TRATS. So they're on their way to stability as well.
Dr. Parham, you're in the funding end of this HBCU thing as a participant or head of the Thurgood Marshall Fund. What's the status from where you sit? I mean, are we still struggling, or have many HBCUs turned a corner? There used to be a question about the education you receive. Now it's a question of, can many Black students afford to go?
Well, what you have in the funding realm are continuing challenges. Right now, as we earlier mentioned, we're going through a cycle, but I don't think that there is a single historically Black college today that is not in need of money. Basically, if you compare the HBCU network with PWIs, you have a difference between night and day. The PWIs actually have endowments, and those are crucial to the operation of a school. Historically Black college presidents, they basically have to continuously raise money. I describe it, I compare it almost with the myth of Sisyphus. When you basically reach the top of that hill, basically the boulder comes pouring back on you, and you begin the process again and again. Nevertheless, these are institutions with leaders who I describe as making bricks without straw. Basically, they perform absolute miracles with the dearth of resources that are available to them. And that's the miracle, frankly, of Black existence. You know, this is nothing terribly new. We certainly would prefer a different avenue, but this is the way it is, and so people basically who largely lead our institutions, like people like Dr. Dawkins, who basically pulled Bennett College out of the brink of total dismissal. They would have been gone had it not been for Dr. Phyllis Dawkins. So, and in many respects, this is not totally unique. They're constantly in a challenge to raise money, but then once the monies are in place, there is the need to also have the capacity and the sources, the resources, along with the necessary staff in order to apply those resources to constructive means. And this is how we are currently placed with regard to the Executive Leadership Institute.
It's to train the next generation of presidents, of college presidents, as I understand it, correct? Will that be, as a project director, Ms. Dawkins, Dr. Dawkins, and then you, Dr. Parham, as a co-chair, it's the first order of business is teaching them how to raise money? Would that be the first objective?
That's one. That's one of 13 competencies. Okay. So we have spent almost 2 years developing a set of competencies that every president should know and be able to perform. And one of those competencies, it is fundraising. Okay. Leading with finances is another one, and another popular one. And these competencies were developed and validated and surveyed, and we conducted a whole process to ensure that these are the competencies that HBCU presidents need to know. And so board governance was number one, fundraising, and leading finance. So I think those were the top three. And so those, and then enrollment management and academic programs. And so, yes, fundraising is one of many competencies that the fellows will be exposed to.
Dr. Parham, how did the ELI come about? What launched this? The popularity of HBCUs or the desperate need for new leadership?
Well, Dr. Louis Sullivan, who is the founding president of Morehouse School of Medicine, and I were actively focusing on the recruitment of a president for Morehouse College.
I got you.
And after that process, basically, we began discussing really how are generally presidents selected. I reflected on my experiences both with UNCF and Thurgood Marshall, and Dr. Sullivan, with his full awareness of not only developing from scratch a medical school, but also his awareness of the operations of Boston University. We began discussing the need really to perhaps set out a kind of more inductive process of identifying leaders. Many times, and really from my own experience, a president may be a former mentor of a trustee. A president who is ultimately selected may have been an outstanding professor in the classroom, and then that president goes into the helm of a college, and all of a sudden that demonstrated capability is challenged. And I think that we see the results of that. Let's look at Morehouse College. Over the past 12 years, Morehouse College has had 3 presidents.
Wow.
3 presidents. Right now, within the Atlanta University Center, I think that the dean of presidents right now has been there for 5.5 years.
Dr. French?
No, that's Dr. Campbell at Spelman.
Right.
And frankly, she really the senior member of the president's cabinet would be Dr. Rice, who's president of the Morehouse School of Medicine. She's been on the campus of Morehouse School of Medicine for 10 years. And I don't recall exactly how long she's been president, but I would say she's probably maybe 6 years. And so that's what we have in terms of senior members of the Atlanta University Center, which is perhaps one of the most important centers of higher education for African Americans in the world. And
Why is that? Why is that? Is it tough to find a good college president? And what is the making of a good HBCU president? What are you looking for in somebody like that? Dr. Dawkins?
So Dr. Parham just hit it exactly. The average length of an HBCU president is about 3.3 years, as reported by Dr. Kimbrough in 2017. And during that same year, the average the length of a president at majority white institutions was about 7 years. Okay. And so that's why we are launching this Executive Leadership Institute at Clark Atlanta University. We're trying to provide the competencies that new and existing presidents need to have in order to survive. And I will say they have to survive board governance. Remember, I talked about that earlier.
What exactly does that mean, ma'am? Explain what that means, board governance. Is that college politics?
No. Every institution has a board of trustees.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And that's called board governance. Okay. The role of the board and the role of the president. You're here on the news sometimes about presidents and board members clashing.
Yeah.
Okay. I was one of those as well. But I wouldn't want anybody to go through what I went through. And so we're going to spend a lot of time during the Institute. In fact, we have secured Chancellor Martin from North Carolina A&T, President Campbell from Spelman, former president of Alabama State Board. She will be one of the ones, and a person from AGB to talk to our fellows about board governance. Okay,
so I still think that's politics. I don't know, ma'am.
Yeah, it is political. I mean, that's what you got to figure out, how you negotiate that, how you manage that. Okay, to survive. That's number one. And then quite often we walk into existing financial problems, and the problems existed while we were there and before we arrived. And then we got to figure out, how do we stabilize the institution? And so that's when fundraising come in. That's when you got to control your enrollment management. You got to increase your enrollment, retain your students, and you have to offer current and future academic programs that are marketable, where students can get jobs upon graduation.
What is the ideal candidate? Who's a quintessential person to be in your institute?
Well, we're looking for individuals at the dean's level or higher. Okay. People with experience. We would like to say 10 years of experience in higher education and at least 3 years of administrative experience at the dean's level or higher. So we're looking for deans of academic programs and various deans inside the institution. We're looking for vice presidents. We're looking for provosts. We are also including new presidents. And also a new feature of our program, we are also including executive leaders from organizations and corporations, because sometimes they end up being our president. And so if they want to know more about historically Black colleges, they should also apply to participate as a fellow.
How many folks do you have in this first class? It's starting next month.
It starts next month in June. The application process is still open. It closes next Saturday. So thank you for that question. On May 15th. So then we will select up to 20 participants.
Dr. Parham, as I understand it, and heard people talk about your past, you were quite active in the Atlanta student movement and the civil rights movement. How important does the college president's activism or history and activism work in today's HBCU society? Is it important to have been in the protesting or been an activist in some degree?
Well, the president doesn't, him or herself, have to have been active, but the president should be very much aware of working with students in order to encourage and channel their activism. For instance, when we began the Atlanta student movement, I was then attending Atlanta University. I was at the last semester of completing my thesis, and about a few months away from completing the requirements for a Master of Social Work degree. Following the 1960 sit-in by 4 students in Greensboro, we then began discussing the need for some kind of activity in Atlanta. Well, it was clear to the presidents of the Atlanta University Center that the students were about to go out and start some trouble.
Some good trouble.
Good trouble.
And I'll never forget, Dr. Rufus Clement, who was then the president of Atlanta University, convened a meeting in Ware Hall, which is one of the dormitories on the campus. And his challenge to us was your parents did not send you to Atlanta to fight the racial issue. And so basically, we have a responsibility to make certain that you get an education and that we protect you. Well, that was his face. However, Rufus Clement provided us with the boardroom in Harkness Hall, where we convened all night meetings. Okay, so we basically had the support informally, but basically we had access to the boardroom at Atlanta University. Also, at the time, Spelman was one of those schools where women basically were only allowed off campus to go to Trevor Arnett Library, and they had to be back on campus
by sundown.
Well, 9 o'clock. Well, the Spelman students, who was then Marion Wright, who became Marion Wright Edelman, she would sit in our meetings all night, and she was allowed back on campus. Basically, Al Manley, who was the president of Spelman, clearly was aware of what was going on. He had a responsibility not only to his trustees, but to the parents who had entrusted their children with him, but also he had to make certain that his students were protected. And so out front, they clearly said, no, you cannot do this. You must be careful. But clearly, they provided the kind of support. And that's the kind of leadership that we're seeking to develop here, to be aware of how important it is to recognize that young people are going to protest. And if you really try to get in their way, then you're being completely undermined, as was the case back in 1960, I believe, when the president of Southern University really did set out to put up barriers to student participation. And there was just, a real reaction to that. So this is what leadership is all about. And that's where Dr. Dawkins comes in, because basically when we're looking at the competencies, all of these traits that really have to be addressed and inculcated by, we feel, future presidents for HBCUs.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Dawkins, this seems like a tough job, but it also seems like a very, very important one.
Mm-hmm. It is. It is a tough job leading an institution,
but also training leaders, right? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. This Executive Leadership Institute is going to last 6 months, okay, and mentoring and coaching is a component of that, and that will continue up to a year. And so we have secured about 38 current and past presidents to present in the program. So I told you about the ones that are presenting on board governance, but we have Dr. Abdullah from Virginia State. We have President Barrett from Xavier University. We have Dr. French from our CAU, and others to present in the program. It's going to be well structured. And at the end of the program, we will expose the fellows to 9 search firms that have agreed to participate and ready to recruit these fellows. Also, they will end the program with a certificate and the opportunity to earn micro credentials. So this is a lot of work in this program. I'm fortunate to have a lot of support from existing and past presidents.
Well, you also got Dr. Parham there. But Dr. Parham, I want to end this on one little grievance I have. The NFL draft. not one person, not one player from the HBCU. That just seems unfair and wrong.
Well, that's a whole nother topic. I honestly feel, though, that when you're Black in America, you become aware of certain kinds of expectations, and my guess is that with Deion Sanders going to Jackson State, and also offering some appeal to really these magnificent athletes, there are relationships that exist with the big schools, and they're not about to give that up, because we're talking about big bucks,
millions. Yes,
and very honestly, I can tell you, it's when I look at certain sports, especially the NFL and the NBA in many respects, it begins to look more like a plantation. You have white coaches. You have basically they're generating these young Black men are generating billions of dollars that are not benefiting anyone other than the schools. If they become injured, all of a sudden they're off of their scholarships. I mean, it's like a slave plantation. So, if you're running a slave plantation, don't you want to keep that going? It's very profitable. So I think that this is the challenge that Deion Sanders and others are encountering, because they're peeling off prospects that normally would have gone to the traditionally white schools, where their budgets and their profits and their coaches who are earning more money than the Nobel laureate. Imagine a coach, a football coach, earning more money than the president of the school. What does that tell you about a system? So I guess it's we have to see how that plays out, but I guess it could have been predicted.
Right, that's true. Well, I gotta tell you, as a product for HBCU, Hampton University, playing on a baseball team taught me a lot more than just how to play baseball. To me, that was part of my education, being in sports, and the righteous coaches we had at the time. And I'm sure that permeates till today.
Yes. Well, Hampton, of course, with Dr. Harvey, he probably is the longest serving president of any college in America today, perhaps. And so, he's in a unique class.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you too are in a unique class and a challenging class to introduce this Executive Leadership Institute. We applaud you, we thank you, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Talk to Me about HBCUs. I'm Maynard Eaton. We'll see you next week.